Good morning, councillors. Good morning, the executive, and good morning to those joining us in the digital gallery for the ordinary meeting of Tuesday, 7th of September 2021. In declaring the meeting open, I would indeed pause and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and across which our region is formed, and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and congratulate them on their ongoing nurture of culture. I note a full attendance of councillors and executive for the meeting today. I note we do have a request for leave of absence which will be dealt with at item 10.2 in today's agenda. Therefore, being no apologies, we turn to item 4, and it's my privilege this morning to welcome Pastor Josh Cox to lead us in prayers digitally. Good morning, Josh.
Good morning, councillors and executive and staff. It's a privilege to be able to just share a few thoughts and to pray for the meeting. So I just wanted to make a few little comments. Just I guess it's come out of, I had a chat with a guy yesterday who just dropped into church. I was trying to do some work, and he wanted to chat for about an hour or so. You know, the older guy was struggling with some significant mental health issues, but shared about the anxiety of all the COVID stuff, and I'm just increasingly seeing this sort of be a bit of an issue, not only with those who are struggling mentally, but those who are sound mind, and even amongst our own church. We've got the pro-vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers, and the pro-mask and the anti-mask, and the pro-conspiracy and the anti-conspiracy. So a very broad cross-section of the community. So I guess it's on the basis of that sort of rising anxiety and tension around the feelings of COVID and the negativity and all that sort of thing. So I just was thoughtful of some words of Paul in 1 Thessalonians, which is simply, therefore encourage one another and build one another up just as you are doing. So I just want to leave those words with you as a councillor and executive, and pray for you in the meeting. Heavenly Father, Lord, we just commit today to you. We thank you, Lord, for it. The sun that is shining, and the coolness of the breeze that is outside blowing. But we thank you, Lord, for that reminder from the Apostle Paul to be about the work of encouragement and building of one another up. We know, Lord, that we live in a wonderful country, live in a wonderful state, and even better area. And we all hold great varying differences of opinions on all sorts of matters, let alone COVID. We do acknowledge and appreciate the fact that we can have freedom of speech and robust debate, and able to articulate various points of view on issues. But we pray to you, Heavenly Father, even as we do that, Lord, there is that premise of encouragement and of building one another up, that together we might be a united people, not uniform by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly united in our desire to see each other better themselves, and, Lord, for a common purpose of a good and strong society that is encouraging and building. And so, Lord, we pray for the meeting. We pray, Lord, for wisdom and guidance, graciousness and compassion in all the discussion and decisions that are made. And, Lord, we want to commit our councillors and executive staff to you in this regard. We ask it in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Josh. It is always a pleasure to have you join us. We look forward to when we're able to return to having physical galleries again. But in the meantime, your words are appreciated. And yes, it's a good reminder that we do have some diversity of perspectives and challenges that we all need to face. You're welcome to continue with us today through the digital portal, but I understand you also have a busy schedule of caring, and we thank you for your ongoing support and service in our community.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor, and all the best with the meeting and the rest of the day.
Thank you. Councillors, we turn now to item 5 in the agenda, which is a declaration of prescribed or declarable conflicts of interest pertaining to matters before the meeting today. Are there any such declarations? Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other declarations? Councillors, in accordance with the requirements of section 150 EW of the Local Government Act 2009, I'm required to advise the chair of this meeting, which in this case is me, if I reasonably believe or suspect that another councillor has either prescribed or declarable conflict of interest pertaining to a decision of council without having declared that conflict of interest. Councillors, I reasonably advise of 2 such matters pertaining to the closed item 11.1, reappointment of the Chief Executive Officer. The first such matter, I hold a reasonable belief that Councillor McGuinness may have a conflict of interest arising from a direct family member being an employee within the organisation that the CEO is responsible for overseeing, including organisation design and all employment related matters for the organisation. And item 2, I hold a reasonable belief that Councillor Swamborough has a conflict of interest arising from a series of public comments over an extended period of time that appear to indicate negative views towards the CEO for the proper execution of his duties that gives rise to a likelihood that he is unable to make an impartial decision in item 11.1. Now, the process now is the opportunity for councillors to respond to those 2 matters in the first instance. Councillor McGuinness. Well, Councillor, this is a particular matter around employment matter, so it's not about the normal operation of decisions of council. This is decisions particularly affecting the CEO. Again, it's raised from the point of proper probity and transparency, which is the legal obligation. So we'll deal with that matter. So of the non-conflicted councillors, are there any? We need to. Well, we need to decide, councillor, because the last time we did that, we actually got criticised. So we need to allow to deal with both matters to be raised. So we move to matter 2. No, to your matter, councillor, first. Well, councillor, as was identified the last time we were dealing with conflicts, potential conflicts of interest. Sorry, councillors, have you got your microphones on?
Mr Mayor, there's 2 issues here. There's Councillor McGuinness's conflict of interest that you've raised. The second matter is my alleged conflicts of interest, which you've also raised. I think these should be dealt with one at a time.
I am happy to deal with them one at a time, councillor. I thought you were purporting that they needed to both be declared because that was the way we dealt with it previously. But we shall deal with this one first. So, councillors, it is up to a vote. Is there any further information required by councillors from either myself or Councillor McGuinness? I would make the point there is a difference between identifying a conflict and the determination of what needs to happen as a result of that. There are two steps in that process, is my observation.
I'll have a question to you, Mr. Mayor. Could you please explain how a low-level employee, a non-managerial position, has in any way have any influence over the appointment of a CEO?
Sorry, Councillor, I didn't say the low-level employee has any influence over it at all. I said, and again, thank you for identifying that you have misunderstood what I've said. What I have said is that there is a reasonable belief that Councillor McGuinness may have a conflict of interest because he has a direct family member who is part of the organisation that the CEO is responsible for overseeing, managing and dealing with all employment matters, including the signing off of enterprise agreements which affect payments, organisation structures, potential changes of organisation size, which can lead to decisions of redundancy. My purpose in raising it is simply for the transparency. And as I said, the second, if such a conflict is determined to exist, the second question is what should be done in response to it, which is a separate part of the decision. Does that provide the clarity of what I have said? I haven't said there is a conflict with.
Perhaps I could ask a question. Well, Mr. Mayor, I asked a question of the CEO.
Sorry, I'm not sure that's appropriate, Councillor. In fact, I wonder if the CEO should be present for this conversation, given that this is so directly affects him.
Well, is that the case, Mr. CEO? Should you be leading the meeting?
I think it's probably safer, Mr. Mayor, if I wasn't here, and potentially there's other people in the room here in terms of our general manager and also our principal specialists for governance who may be able to assist council with further inquiries.
So thank you. I think, CEO, it may be wise that you just take a time out.
Councillor McConnell, I disagree. We've got questions. Does this employee talk with the CEO? How do we know that? So, I've got questions for the CEO.
Well, sorry. Well, Councillor, my point in raising it is not about whether the employee influences the CEO. You're confusing what I'm saying.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about any interaction with the CEO. We're talking about his performance, not about his decision making.
No, we're not talking about his performance, Councillor. That is not correct. We are talking. So, Councillor, we can't discuss the content of the agenda item. We're talking about what is there as the potential renewal of the CEO's contract. And the consideration we're dealing with at the moment is about whether any councillor has a potential conflict in properly and impartially considering the matter. So firstly, whether such a declarable interest exists, and secondly, then what to do in response to that. So it is a two-step process, and it doesn't relate to the employee. It relates to the structural relationship and the relationship of the councillor, not of the employee.
Mr. Mayor, just a question, to the CEO.
Sorry, Councillor, I thought you had asked when the CEO was departing to allow this discussion, because this puts him in a very uncomfortable place.
Well, with the issue here is an issue of conflict of interest. And
But
that's
not his conflict of interest to address.
Exactly right. That's why Councillor McConnell is probably right, and I don't see that I asked the question if he was going to leave or not. I didn't say you should leave. I think Councillor McConnell is probably correct in that the CEO probably should stay for this discussion, because there are questions that need to be answered and there's law that needs to be interpreted. And he's the Chief Executive Officer, and I certainly have some questions of the CEO as well.
So it's inappropriate. I believe it's inappropriate for the CEO to be in that position. That's why we have a head of governance here to provide any clarifications should they be needed. That's what he's there for. But this is a very simple question. And if there is additional information required of why I have the reasonable belief, or why Councillor McGuinness believes it's not material, those are reasonable questions. Asking the CEO about the operating relationship with an individual employee doesn't impact on the relationship that exists for the councillor, is all I'm saying.
Can I ask a quick question of Councillor McGuinness?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind, and does your daughter speak to you about anything to do with senior management of council?
I can't remember in any case that she has. Yeah. If not, if it was a long time ago, and but certainly
I'm happy to take
we don't
McGuinness's
engage in those discussions. It wouldn't be right that we should. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, can I just make reference? The process, I mean, obviously, to the letter of the law, we are following process. I would get councillors to refer to the Queensland Government guide around managing conflicts of interest. Councillor McConnell, I don't think it's the interpretation of the person. If you read the guides, it talks about a reasonable person might think. So it's not necessarily the opinion of the person, but someone in the public who could think. And that's, I guess, just reading to the letter of the law, if in the instance that again, we talk about the related parties, it's you and a close associate, and a daughter or a family member is a close associate. If they are working within council, and a reasonable person may think that, okay, well, a decision that elected member may have could impact on that. So it's not necessarily the opinions of the people inside the chambers, but it refers to what the reasonable person could perceive or think.
So just a question to the General Manager, in light of that, could you explain, section 194A of the Local Government Act, and what that refers to? And in case seems like you're well prepared and orchestrated to answer a lot of questions on this today, and so am I. Section 194A, appointment of Chief Executive Officer. It says the local government must appoint a qualified person to be its Chief Executive Officer. Councillor McGuinness is a member of the local government. The conflict of interest, as you say, is right. Would the public perceive that Councillor McGuinness has a conflict of interest in this thing? I don't believe that they would. I think it's a very long bow to draw. And I also believe that you've rightly identified that now comes down to a decision of the local government as to whether we consider he has that conflict of interest. So that comes down to a vote as to whether that is the case.
Councillor, that is exactly correct, and that was exactly what I was alluding to as the steps. So you're not suggesting anything that wasn't proposed.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor, and but as per the guidelines, that's what it's up to council to decide that now. And we were just getting to that point, and I guess there was some conjecture around back and forths around the clarity around it. But by definition, the process is as per what it stands, and it's up to council now to decide and manage that conflict.
Councillor?
Mayor, I just find it strange that this arises now If this is the case, and this is the opinion of yourself and some other people around the place, maybe I should never have been here when any general manager was appointed, no CEO was appointed. I find it very strange. I can't find another word that it's raised now and why it hasn't been raised before.
Well, Councillor, I can only talk about the circumstance that I was reflecting on in the preparation for the matters before us today. And perhaps it's the heightened awareness around what has changed significantly in the understanding and the redeclaration and the redefinition around conflicts of interest since the CEO was appointed, and bearing in mind that that's the appointment that council controls, and in fulfilling the obligation, for me, I am simply doing what I believe I'm bound by legislation to do, is to raise what I see as a possibility so that we collectively then determine whether that has merit. The fact that we haven't identified that in the past is not a relevant issue today. It's simply been identified today. Because the legislation's bounced around quite a lot since 2018, Councillor.
We have ratified, we mightn't have made the appointments as such, but we've ratified appointments of general managers since then.
Councillor, we're dealing, and we may have acted in error not to properly identify relationships in the past. I can't remedy the sins of the past. I'm simply fulfilling my obligation as a councillor under the relevant provisions of the Act as I see them, to put that on the table for us to consider. That's all I'm doing, Councillor. This is just an objective process that I felt obliged to follow. So, if there are no further questions,
I'd like to move that the motion be put.
Thank you, Councillor. If you'd been patient, I was about to put to the meeting, about to ask the meeting if there were any further questions. Firstly, Councillor.
Clarification, Mayor, am I to leave the meeting for this vote or not?
You
I
can
ask
choose
the General Manager, please, and do I partake? I can't partake in the vote, I take it, General Manager?
Thank you, Councillor McGuinness. It's, I guess, as per the guidelines, it's you need to make a disclosure around whether you want to stay in the meeting, or also whether or not you want to vote. It's up to the council then to decide that matter, but you don't vote on your own. You're asking the council to vote.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move a motion at this point in time that Councillor McConnell, Councillor McGuinness does not have a conflict of interest, and he is not required to move himself from the meeting.
Sorry, firstly, Councillor, you're confusing the issue. Firstly, it is a personal decision for Councillor McGuinness. It's not a motion. It's a personal decision for Councillor McGuinness whether he wishes to stay whilst the vote is taken.
That's correct.
That is a personal decision, so it doesn't require a motion from you whether he stays whilst the vote is taken on this matter. It's good to understand the gaps in understanding. However, the councillor cannot participate in the vote on the matter.
Mr. Mayor, I believe that they can. I think I'd seek clarification from the CEO in relation to that.
Well, seek it from the governance. Quite clearly, as per prior examples that we've dealt with, Councillor, the individual councillor who may or may not be conflicted cannot participate in the vote on whether they have such a conflict.
So, Mr. Mayor, the process then would be if Councillor McGuinness does decide to leave the meeting, then we can move a motion as to whether or not he can come back and participate in the vote.
Sorry, no, councillor. Councillor, you are totally out of order, and you are, to be clear, the vote that we are about to consider is whether or not we believe there is materiality in the circumstance that I've presented. Councillor McGuinness has responded to that. That's the purpose of putting it on the table, to allow Councillor McGuinness to respond, but it then requires a vote of councillors as to whether they believe that still presents a conflict or not. If councillors then consider that, and this is unconflicted councillor, so not the councillor himself, Councillor McGuinness is welcome to stay whilst we have that vote, if he chooses to do, or if he chooses to leave. That is his personal choice. It is not a decision that council can direct. That is totally as per the guideline. GM, would you just confirm?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. That's a treatment of a declarable conflict of interest. It's up to the elected member who has a declarable to choose to either leave the meeting, to either choose to leave the meeting, or other councillors vote to decide whether they participate in the decision in the declarable conflict of interest. Yes, so that's what I mean. It's not a motion from another member. It's the person declaring who has a declarable conflict of interest to make that position.
Just for clarification there, that's even if I don't believe I've got a declarable conflict of interest.
Correct.
General Manager. Yep.
If there is reasons around it, I guess it's up to the other members to deem that. Just based on the advice from governance, Mr. Mayor, that based on that, there is no choice on that counter. The other members would just have to decide around that matter. Regardless, if it has been flagged, it's up to the other elected members to resolve whether they deem it as being a declarable interest or not.
Okay, is that clear for you, councillor? That cleared your answers, your questions?
Yeah, I think the whole thing, it's very clear to me. It cements a lot of thoughts in my mind, Mayor, the whole process here, actually. Yeah.
Well, councillor, it's, again, I highlight that there is a legislative obligation for any councillor where they have those reasonable suspicions to raise it, and it's then a consideration of the materiality of it. No further questions. We do now need to consider whether or not we believe Councillor McGuinness has, firstly, whether Councillor McGuinness has a declarable conflict of interest, or
Mr. Mayor, there's a motion on the table already.
Yeah, but Councillor, I will draw your attention again to, there is no such thing as a conflict of interest anymore in the legislation. So you are asking a question that doesn't have a legal basis. There is a prescribed conflict of interest or a declarable conflict of interest. So that's why I'm trying to help you with the gap of what you are putting forward being identified. So a conflict of interest does not, as you've put it in the motion, is a meaningless statement anymore, because the legislation now identifies either A or B.
Well, I'll modify that to Councillor McGuinness does not have any conflict of interest, whether it be declarable or otherwise. He is not required to remove himself from the meeting.
declarable or prescribed, because there are only two forms, please. I'm happy to, but I'm just trying to help councillor make this properly legally accurate, which I know is something you are often wanting to ensure, and I'm trying to help you ensure that.
And that's correct, Mr. Mayor, because if it's the other, as you rightly pointed out, the process of managing conflicts of interest,
Sorry,
it's either
Councillor,
prescribed or a declarable. And if it is a prescribed, there's no, without reasonable doubt, there's no participation of any kind whatsoever.
Correct.
And this, the declarable one, it is allowing the councils to decide upon that. So if it was the other, there would be there's no process at all whatsoever.
Councillors, I just refer to Councillor Swanborough's comment. There are not three versions of conflict of interest as pertains to this process today.
Mr. Mayor, your original statement put forward, are you saying that Councillor McGuinness has a declarable conflict of interest, or are you saying that he has prescribed conflict of interest?
I was unable to determine what type of conflict of interest, and I draw your attention, councillor, thank you for the question, to this guide which you all have and should be referring to. And the question arises because of the language about close associate includes spouse, parent, child or sibling, and the prescribed, it talks about prescribed conflict of interest relating to the appointment or employment matters of the chief executive if a close associate. So I don't believe, my personal belief is it doesn't meet the threshold of a prescribed conflict, and therefore it leaves the question mark about whether it is a declarable conflict of interest. That's the purpose for raising it, is so that we properly consider it and have proper probity. This is not any form of attack or questioning except to ensure that we've passed the transparency test around, and that's why there's a positive obligation, councillors, for any time you have a reasonable suspicion to bring it forward. That's what I've done. So we move forward with the decision, with the vote. If there's no other points of clarification, councillors, put to the vote. Well, the question's really simple, is whether it's moved by Councillor Swanborough or moved from the chair, it really doesn't matter. Do we believe that normally this would just be, do we believe that Councillor McGuinness has any conflict of interest, declarable or otherwise? I don't believe the second part of this is relevant at this time, councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I maintain that I've moved the motion, and I also want to amend that motion. And I want to say that he is not required to remove himself from the meeting and is able to vote on the on the motion.
Sorry, councillor, point of order. You cannot do that by motion. You are acting illegally. You are acting illegally to add that to the motion.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. And to put it simply, we're dealing with two matters at the first. The first matter we're dealing with is actually deciding whether or not council is deemed for Councillor McGuinness to have a declarable. Following the outcome of that, depending on the outcome of that, then you deal with the second matter around in the event that if participating or staying in the room. So the first matter is for council to decide to whether or not there is Councillor McGuinness has a declarable conflict of interest in this, and then dealing with that depending on the outcome of that motion, of that matter. Sorry.
So, councillor, I'm going to again point out to you that your motion as you've tabled it is illegal for this meeting to consider. Quite clearly in contravention of the legislation. So,
well, as you've said, well, if you believe, Mr. Mayor, that the last phrase is not legal, I'm happy to leave it as as it was originally proposed.
And also just after, otherwise it should be.
So, Councillor, I'm going to say again, there are only two forms of conflict of interest, declarable or prescribed. There's no such category called otherwise. And the only thing we vote on at first is if we decide there is no conflict of interest, then he's not required, then nothing further happens. Okay, so the rest of what you've put there is superfluous.
Take out the word otherwise.
It should just be whether Councillor McGuinness does have any conflict of interest, and that should be basically it. And then
Just put declarable. Or
just declarable conflict, yeah.
Just,
That Councillor McGuinness, so the motion I'm led to believe is that that the Councillor McGuinness does not have a declarable conflict of interest, and that's the first matter that needs to be dealt with. Following the outcome of that, then we'll cross that when we need.
Decision of if there is found to be a conflict, then it's a process of deciding what to do about the conflict.
That's right.
So,
Declarable conflict
put
of interest.
declarable instead of any. Be declarable. Councillor, you. Yes, well, Councillor, I believe it.
Just say no.
And Councillor, again, the rest of what you've put there is.
Yes. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, it should be a declarable conflict of interest.
So first, just so
Remove
where
that.
you've got highlighted, I believe Councillor Swamber is now agreeing that that should be removed because it's not. He's trying to jump two decisions into one, and this should refer to a declarable conflict of interest.
That's correct.
I don't believe there's any further questions or need for discussion. Second to Councillor McConnell. So the motion reads that Councillor McGuinness does not have a declarable conflict of interest. Those who agree? That's unanimous. Thank you, Councillor, for the explanation to that. I'm satisfied with your explanation.
And Mayor, if I could add that does provide prevention is better than having the necessary action. And I think as due process, especially with governance and with the current activity, it is a minefield at the moment, and we do appreciate those clauses that are contained in there and the adherence to such things, so that it doesn't create the bigger potential mess later down the track.
Thank you, GM. Can I now move to matter 2? And again, for
Mayor,
clarity.
could we record that I didn't vote on that?
No, yeah, correct. Unanimous, noting that Councillor McGuinness, obviously Councillor McGuinness did not, as per legislative requirements, Councillor McGuinness did not participate in the vote. So if I reiterate matter 2, I hold and just provide the clarification going in, I hold a reasonable belief that Councillor Swamborough has a declarable conflict of interest arising from a series of public comments over an extended period of time that appear to indicate negative views towards a CEO for the proper execution of his duties, that gives rise to a likelihood that it is unable to make an impartial decision in item 11.1. Councillor, you wish to respond?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'm elected as a councillor for the Scenic Rim Regional Councillor, and one of the duties that I have is to be responsible to the people for the performance of the local government. Clearly, the Chief Executive Officer is the main person who is responsible for implementing council decisions, and he is also the person who is ultimately accountable to the council for the performance of the local government. I don't believe that I have ever showed any bias towards the CEO. I've been critical of the performance of the council, and I've written a lot about that. I think that's been justified under the circumstances. Certainly is my right to have that opinion and to express it. My constituents wouldn't think anything less of myself and of any other council who also was from time to time critical of the council's performance. I don't believe personally that when I make any comments about the performance of council, I'm showing bias towards any one particular officer. My philosophy in being a councillor that is I play the issues, I never play the man. And I think it would be a wrong assumption to just because someone might take something personally, never my intention to be personal, it's only my intention to debate issues and to reflect on decisions made. So no, I don't have a conflict of interest in any way, shape or form in relation to this matter.
Thank you for your response, Councillor. I do have further information to provide for the basis of my belief. Councillor McConnell, unless you have a...
I was just going to move a motion that Councillor McGuinness does not have a declarable conflict of interest.
Well,
Mr Mayor?
Councillor Swanborough, well, perhaps, Councillor, you want to hear the full conversation. What gives rise to my concern is, and I have just identified some public comments as indicated, 18th of June 2020 in the Scenic News. Lack of transparency happens in all councils, and from my understanding of organisation psychology and real transparency, I know it all comes down to culture, which starts at the top. This appears to accuse the CEO of acting inappropriately. However, no such matter has been sustained brought forward or sustained in due process. 17th of December 2020 in the Scenic News, taking on a culture of secrecy and won't change is always a challenge. Again, appears suggestive in the context of the prior comment of accusing the CEO of acting outside of his legislated obligation. Again, as a very general perception rather than on the basis of any sustained evidence or due process. 23rd of December 2020 in the Fassifern Guardian and Tribute, Councillor Swanborough accused the council of using the complaint system as a political weapon and stating the council desperately want to silence him, even though the councillor rightly knows that, or should know, that Section 150P of the Local Government Act 2009 requires that the CEO, upon receiving a complaint about the conduct of a councillor, must refer the matter to the OIA. That's a positive obligation. It is not an option. 19th of May 2021, Fassifern Guardian and Tribune, again with reference to the reporting of complaints, indicates, and I must on this occasion use extracts from a very long article, but these are quotes of Councillor Swanborough in that article, turned into a process where mayors, CEOs and any bureaucrat can, under a cloak of secrecy, bombard a councillor who is on the outer and endeavour to just tie them up in red tape. Here again, it appears to include a negative perception towards the CEO for fulfilling his legal obligation under Section 150P of the Local Government Act 2009, as previously explained. My reasonable concern is that Councillor Swanborough, as indicated in these public comments, may be unable to exercise impartial consideration in this matter.
Would you like me to respond, Mr. Mayor?
Councillor, I provided what's the basis of my belief.
I thank you, Mr. Mayor, for giving us that reiteration of historical events over the last 12 months. Those statements are views that are in accordance with organisational theory. I talk a lot about culture, and culture does start at the top, Mr. Mayor, but you know, some might believe that you are the top of the council and not the CEO. I mean, starting at the top could also mean it's every general manager in this room is responsible for culture in an organisation. It certainly is a process of, you know, if the cap fits, wear it, I guess. There's some reflection here that the CEO obviously believes that it's aimed personally at him, but it's actually aimed at
point
the
of
top.
order, Councillor, just for clarity. The CEO has not discussed this with me, and the CEO has not made any contribution. This is my reasonable belief. So please don't. Again, that's an example of where you continue to evidence my concern. So the CEO has no involvement with me as a councillor putting forward what I have a reasonable belief.
You haven't discussed it with him at all, is your
No,
statement?
I have not,
Okay,
Councillor.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, continuing on, really the statements that I made, I stand behind those statements, and you know, I make comments in the newspaper about council's performance almost, and council's decisions almost every fortnight. I also note, Mr. Mayor, that there have been over 40, I think it's up to 45 OIA complaints made against me, and I'd say that 3/4 of them are in relation to every time I write something in the newspaper. But I also observe, Mr. Mayor, that you know, over half of those have already been assessed by the OIA, and the OIA has never made a finding against me that those things are in any way inappropriate or misconduct. So I think if you had an adverse finding against me in relation to this, there would be some justification, maybe not, of what you say, but there has not been any adverse finding against me in relation to what I write in the newspaper. And as I reiterate again, those are general terms, and in organisational theory, there is no question that in an organisation, culture does start from the top, and people in an organisation try to do the right thing by their management and by the leaders of an organisation, and that's basically the root. That's how culture starts in any organisation. And so I'm only reflecting, you know, what is generic organisational behavioural theory in some of those things, and I think that that's quite reasonable and perfect to do.
Well,
I have no conflict of interest in relation to this particular issue.
Well, Councillor, I would just give two observations. You didn't address the issue. The fact that there have been multiple complaints is totally irrelevant to the comments that you had made. The comments suggesting that the complaint system is a political weapon, knowing that the CEO, say the Mayor and other councils, have a positive obligation to report a matter.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor,
Point of order. Point of order.
Thank you, Councillor. What's your concern? What's your point of order?
My concern, Mr. Mayor, is that you already know the legislation in relation to the OIA. There is absolutely no way that I know who the complainants are about any complaint that is made to the OIA. So how you can make that assumption, I do not know, because I do not know a single complainant's name that has ever made a complaint against me. And so I would say that you're making an assumption which is not sustainable.
Well, Councillor, again, I draw to your own observation at the start of your iteration today that that you've identified the CEO as the man at the top. You made the comment that he's the main person?
That's not correct, Mr. Mayor. I said that you could be the man at the top.
No, before you came back with that, early on, you identified that in your first response. Again, the wording that you've used, and particularly, again, I draw attention of councillors, you've specifically singled out mayors, CEOs and any bureaucrats, so you've included the CEO in your suggestion that the process is being unfairly used, even though you know that there is a legal obligation to report without fear or favour, which applies to the CEO and applies, for that matter, to me, but certainly applies to the CEO. And your comments bring into question whether you can be impartial in your consideration concerning his contract of employment. That's why I have brought the matter to the consideration of council. Are there other questions, councillors?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to ask a question of the General Manager. If, and I think it's a very big if, that Councillor Swanborough has a declarable conflict of interest, does that mean anyone who has praised the CEO has a conflict of interest and should absent themselves from the discussion also?
Councillor, if anybody's wanting to raise such a matter based on public commentary outside of the requirements, the normal requirements of their role, then you should have brought that forward as a proper concern. But can we deal with the matter before us now? And then if you feel you have a matter to bring forward based on public commentary, do you have any questions? Did you have a question for the GM in that?
Can we get an answer to that
From
question?
The GM?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, councillors. Yeah, I refer back to the guideline again. It's interest where a reasonable person might think you are biased. So be it positive or negative. And as the mayor suggested, I guess we're dealing with this particular matter. If there are any other matters that are out there in the public where is a visual praising of the CEO and someone is across that, then that matter should be brought forward as well. But based on the definition, where a reasonable person could be biased is the matter at hand.
Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, I go back to moving the motion that Councillor Swanborough does not have a declarable conflict of interest.
Moved by Councillor McConnell. Any other questions, councillors? Second, Councillor Chalk. Again, no further discussion. Do you wish to talk to your motion, Councillor McConnell?
I think this is a slippery slope we've gone down where commentary about council or anyone can get you removed from a vote. Is a slippery slope. I'm disappointed it's gone down this, but it is what it is, and I stand by my motion.
Wishing to speak against the motion? I will speak against the motion. Again, contrary to, I hold a view different to Councillor McConnell, because the legislation provides the requirement, the positive requirement, where a councillor believes a matter can lead to the inability to, in the public perception and in the practical process, to provide impartial consideration of a matter. I believe the pattern of conversation over time, particularly the comments that suggest that somehow or other, particularly in the May comments that suggest that the CEO, among others, is creating, misusing the process without actually acknowledging that at any time that there is actually a legal requirement to put any complaint brought forward to the OAA for them to independently assess. That is the legal process that the CEO is required to uphold. I believe that makes it questionable from a reasonable person perspective to consider how those comments lead to an impartial state of mind. Those public comments, particularly. Anyone else wishing to speak? It's not a transcript, it's a summary. So what, can I ask what's your concern? Okay. Just a question, Mr. Mayor. So, but it's. Okay, we put the vote. Councillor, this is not the transcript. The transcript will be completed as part of the forming of the minutes. That's what was just alluded. This isn't a full transcript. But you have. No, I don't, Councillor. There's a very brief comment. That's hardly. It's just a hold point. It's very clearly just a dot point. And your response will be discussed with you to put a summary statement. Okay, Councillor, is that provided? That's what the Minute Secretary clarified for you. Those in support of the motion that Councillor Swanborough does not have a declarable conflict of interest? Those against? And we'll call a division. Those for the motion, division 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and against the Mayor. Thank you, councillors. It's a messy process, but it is what we are required to comply with. Now move forward to, there are no announcements before the meeting today. There are no deputations or petitions advised for today's meeting. Come to the item 8, confirmation of minutes of the prior meeting of the 17th of August. You all had access to them over a period of time, councillors. We have a recommended motion that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 17th of August 2021 be adopted. I seek a mover. Councillor Enright. Any questions to the motion or to the minutes? Not seek a seconder. Councillor West, thank you. Wishing to speak? Okay. Anyone wishing to seek leave to speak? Motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. There's no business arising from the previous minutes for the meeting today. So we move to item 10, business of the meeting, and we move to item 10.1. CEO, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, councillors, executive officers and members of the public listening at home. The first item relates to the Local Government Association of Queensland Waste Forum, 28th to 29th of September 2021, and a request has been received from Councillor McConnell to attend this conference being held in Brisbane The theme of the conference this year is progressing sustainable solutions and partnerships with industry or government and industry, and includes presentations or keynote address from the Honourable Megan Scanlon MP, the Minister, Honourable Trevor Evans, and also the Mayor as a guest speaker. Program was included. I will note, councillors, that under previous council considerations and resolutions, the very first one indicates that the Mayor was appointed to the Council of Mayors SEQ Waste Working Group by Council. That appointment was actually made by the Council of Mayors, and it would be in our template from our previous way of announcing council's representation or councillors' representations on different committees. So into the future, we'll need to rescribe the way that we write that. As you recall, from the 25th of May, we separated councillors' appointments into those which are undertaken by council by resolution, and then a separate list which has a number of other appointments which are either made by others or groups and attendances that councillors choose themselves to attend. I will indicate that as a result, the Mayor's attendance at the forum is in line with this position as Council's representative on the Council of Mayors, and therefore it doesn't require endorsement. The budget is shown there. As I said, the program's attached. And when we consulted with the Mayor and councillors, Councillor McConnell had previously attended the forum last year and expressed interest again, and other councillors were reasonably supportive of the Councillor McConnell's attendance.
So, councillors, any questions to the report? And councillors, I shouldn't have to keep reminding them, can I please remind you, use your microphones when you are identified to speak. Are there any questions to the report?
Thank you, Mayor. A question to the CEO or the General Manager. Will there be an opportunity for council officers to attend this waste forum as well?
Thank you, Councillor Enright, for your question. Obviously, waste is a very important matter affecting communities and local governments, and I can indicate that Council's Coordinator of Waste Services is attending this forum.
Any further questions? If not, could you please introduce the recommendation, CEO? Seeker mover, Councillor Swamborough. Any further questions, councillors? Discussion, if not, seek a seconder. Councillor Enright, you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor Swamborough? No, anyone seeking leave to speak against the motion? Seeking leave to speak additionally to the motion? Motion, those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.2. I note Councillor McGuinness is stepping out for a moment, although I don't believe that's necessary for a leave of absence. However, CEO, would you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Mayor. I have received a request for a leave of absence from Councillor Duncan McInnes for the council meeting to be held on the 21st of September. So the recommendation accordingly seeks that approval from council.
Any questions, councillors? Not. Just introduce the recommendation, CEO.
Recommendation is that council grant Councillor McInnes leave of absence from the ordinary meeting to be held on 21st September 2021.
Seeker mover, Councillor McConnell. Any further questions or discussion? Seconder, Councillor Chalk. You wish to speak at all, Councillor McConnell?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone seeking leave to speak against? Seeking leave to speak additionally? Put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Could someone please retrieve Councillor McGuinness? Move to item 10.3. GM, we seek your assistance to introduce this item.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor and councillors and everybody listening online. Today, we're presenting an update on an operational matter regarding the funding reallocation to support Scenic Rim Farmgate Trails and regional events. I have with me today the Manager of Regional Prosperity and Communications, Brenda Walker, and also the Principal Specialist for Regional Events, Scott McDuff. And I believe we're going to ask Scott just to provide an overview of the purpose of this report.
Thank you, Deborah. I'll take it that the report's been read. Due to the cancellation of the Winter Harvest Festival, thanks to COVID-19, I approached Department of Tourism, Innovation and Sport to reallocate those funds from the Tourism Recovery Fund for Local Government Category C that was remaining after some expenses were incurred for Winter Harvest Festival and Eat Local Week. Those funds that were remaining, we looked at reallocating towards some regional event activities, those being Destination Scenic Rims, Scenic Rim Farmgate Trails, looking at also reallocating those funds to the Scenic Rim Eat Local Week, looking at consultation engagement for some industry specialists to provide some recommendations across updating website, updating ticketing platform, also looking at repurposing some of that funding towards the Scenic Rim Clydesdale Spectacular. That event was very, very successful this year. And also looking at supporting some regional events currently under development. At this stage, there is just over $99,000 of remaining funding being repurposed. $40,000 of that has already been repurposed towards the Scenic Rim Farmgate Trails, one which has already occurred in August and another which is about to occur on the 23rd of October. The event in August was very, very successful and utilised some of our entertainers and our stall holders along the Farmgate Trail. 20 venues was just on last weekend, actually.
Thank you. Councillors, questions to the report before you? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. Just further to that last point, Scott, given that the first Farmgate Trail was held on the 28th of August, has there been any general feedback from those of the producers and suppliers?
Just some anecdotal data, Councillor. That being Scenic Rim Farm Shop had their best day's trade ever. On that day, Olive View Estate had over 1,000 attend. Scenic Rim Brewery, Farmgate Trail sold out. Towery Sheep Cheeses had as many as they had for the Farmgate Trail on Easter. Tom Rupp's Dairy Farm had 647 attend and sold out of nearly all of their product. Greenleaf Farm and Cottages had over 100. I've had reports of very, very good attendance at the Farmgate Trails in Canunga and Tamborine Mountain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions to the report for clarification, councillors? Thank you. And we should introduce the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. The recommendation before you today has multiple parts. That Council note the remaining local government Category C Tourism Recovery Package 2 Tourism Recovery Fund of $99,256.68 from the Queensland Government Department of Tourism, Innovation and Sport for the Winter Harvest Festival 10th Anniversary celebrations for Eat Local Week have been approved to be reallocated as follows. $40,000 to Destination Scenic Rim under a funding agreement to support planning and delivery of the Scenic Rim Farmgate Trails on 28 August and 23 October 2021. And $15,000 to fund the comprehensive audit of Eat Local Week, Scenic Rim Eat Local Week, including consultation and engagement with relevant industry stakeholders, and provide recommendations to optimise the future of the event and its contribution to the Scenic Rim economy. $15,000 to fund a review and redevelopment of the Scenic Rim Eat Local Week website to enable it to optimise the event booking experience for visitors to the event. $10,000 to $15,000 to fund the comprehensive audit of the Scenic Rim Clydesdale Spectacular, including consultation and engagement with relevant stakeholders, and provide strategic plan to facilitate growth and optimise the future of the event and its contribution to the Scenic Rim economy. And $14,256.68 to support regional events currently under development.
Thank you. Councillors, we have a recommended motion before us. I seek a mover. Councillor West. Any further questions, councillors? Further discussion? Councillor McConnell.
Can I just ask a question of the GM? Is it usual or unusual when things like this happen with a grant that the governing authority allow us to reallocate?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. Actually, if you had asked me this question 18 months ago, I would have said highly unlikely that we could ever negotiate variations such as this for repurposing funds such as this. However, I think many of the granting organisations over the last 12 to 18 months have now realised that with the impacts of COVID and, this is bushfire recovery funding, the importance around resilience and recovering of communities, we're seeing a lot more flexibility and agility in the discussions that we're having with those agencies. And in a couple of the grant agreements that we've had in recent times, it's actually had a sentence or two in it naming, where we've been applying for funds for COVID recovery events, where they've named that there would be some consideration should COVID impact the ability for the event to be run. So I'm very grateful that the departments are working so closely with our staff. They take a very considered approach, and every time we approach them for something like this, they go through their normal approval processes. And so for them to come back so quickly and to agree for us to be able to pivot as quickly as we have and not lose the visitors to the region, in particular supporting the Scenic Rim Farmgate Trail, was really a great coup for all of those operators that were so badly affected by the Winter Harvest Festival. So I think it's really important to see that the government are working, both levels of government are working really closely with us to ensure that the benefits for the intent of the grants are actually fundamentally delivered within region. And, because conversely, they could just ask for the funds back.
If they had have asked for the funds back, would we have been able to support the Farmgate Trail as we did?
We've always supported Destination Scenic Rim's initiative to establish the Farmgate Trail when they did last year to offset the cancellation of ECA, trying to bring people still into the country and to enjoy the spoils of everything we have to offer here. We've supported it in terms of officer time and ability to build it into our social media and our marketing, but we've never had a cash allocation such as this that we could distribute to Destination Scenic Rim. But I think it goes to the core of the solid partnership that we're working on with them. And I think fundamentally what we have done is divert all the attendees that might have come to Winter Harvest Festival and met one of our wonderful producers or growers at a stall at the Winter Harvest Festival. They've now had the opportunity to come into the region as they might have, for Winter Harvest Festival, but now they're actually coming to the direct farm gates and they're meeting people in place. And I think it's a great outcome for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Swanbury. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question on this matter as well. Destination Scenic Rim has become an independent body at this point in time, and Council, previously has been supporting this recurring event, which the report says is becoming more successful. What will be the position with recurring funding from Council to Destination Scenic Rim for this particular activity?
So the 28th of August was the second farm gate, and the next one's planned, as the report says. So whether it will continue to recur in the future is a matter for Destination Scenic Rim. We would encourage them to consider that, because I think the results speak for themselves, and the feedback we've had from operators has been quite extremely positive. At this point in time, we don't have a budget allocation to provide recurring funding to Destination Scenic Rim. We would encourage them to look for grants and to have more participation. They had 20 farm gates this time. That's likely to grow. We're seeing interest, from just this last weekend. So in future, as a part of the review of Eat Local Week or any of the programs that we run, officers may come back with a proposal to Council to consider funding Scenic Rim farm gates in the future, but that would be a matter of a decision of the table. And any grants that we become aware of that we could assist them to apply with, we would certainly encourage them also to look for independent funding. They could also seek sponsorship. And they could also seek a user pay systems, because the more and more farm gates that participate and benefit may be asked in the future to make a contribution.
Thank you. Councillor McInnes.
Yes, Mayor, could I just ask approximately what percentage of our farms does these 20 represent? Do you know, Scott?
I'm not sure, Councillor, I'm sorry.
I just haven't got the figure in my mind either, but yeah. I'm guessing it, yeah.
Many were invited and 20 took up that invitation to be part of that trail.
Sorry, Councillor McConnell.
How many were on the first farm trial?
15, Councillor.
Okay, so increasing. So as they see popularity, it should get better. Okay, thank you.
Yep. And in fact, some of the producers and growers have identified neighbours or properties in close vicinity, which would enable mini itineraries and day trips for visitor dispersal, so that people can come and go to a succession of properties. So we're seeing some great collaboration starting to form from that as well.
Thank you, councillors. I seek a seconder. Oh, sorry, Councillor McGuinness.
Just thought of another question. I take it all these people are advised that they should carry their own public risk insurance and so on. Council's not responsible for that in any form. And are they, I've seen plenty of people over the years just get caught out on inviting people onto their farms and not have adequate insurance to cover it. Do we advise them in that way too?
Absolutely, Council. I had a long discussion with the CEO of Destination Scenic Rim regarding exactly that, and she has put out communication to all of those participants of the Farmgate Trail, requesting that their public liability cover any visitors to their property.
Thank you. Seek a seconder. Councillor Enright. Wishing to speak to your motion, Councillor West.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, a couple of things I want to mention is that obviously these events are all about showcasing not only our producers but all our communities, and with the recent events being cancelled with the ECA and various different shows, obviously with a lot of our farmgate operators were left with a lot of stock. So certainly this was a fabulous opportunity to showcase their produce, but as well as the region. I also want to just acknowledge the staff for your quick turnaround and the relationships that you've obviously built up with the funding bodies, that this was all able to occur. I did just want to mention just some feedback that came from Tom Rupp's farm up in Division 3, and certainly Kay did write a message to us all to say just how beneficial the funding was for them. They have been doing these farm gates for a long time, and generally unfunded actually, but just how having that little bit of funding, musicians and people to help them on the gate, just what a difference it made. And they were able to mingle with their guests, which is what they really like doing, and talking to people on the ground. And that's what people do come to talk to the farmers. So I'm happy to support this motion.
Thank you. Wishing to speak against the motion? Anyone seeking leave to speak additionally to the motion? Councillor Swanborough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in relation to what Councillor West said, do each of the participating farms, do they all get an equal amount of funds to run their?
Sorry, Councillor. We're speaking in regard. You're asking an additional question rather than speaking to the motion.
Okay. Well. Okay. I
So
won't ask the question.
I'll allow the additional question, but the question's not to the councillor. The question, I guess, is to Destination Scenic Rim, or Scott may know. I'll allow the question even though it's outside of process. Councillor?
Councillor, that was up to Destination Scenic Rim to decide on how that funding was allocated and across both farm gate trails. So obviously there's 20 farm gates in this trail. They're building that, planning to build that for the 23rd of October trail, and how they allocated was up to Destination Scenic Rim.
Wishing to speak additionally, Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly support this motion to the points that Councillor West already raised. But I think in addition to that, we're seeing the benefit of the unified LTO in Destination Scenic Rim and what we can do as a unified region. So well done to all of the team.
Thank you. Anyone else seeking leave to speak additionally to the motion? If not, Councillor West, do you wish to close it all? Thank you. Put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you for preparing such a comprehensive report, and thank you to the officers for progressing those conversations with such alacrity to allow that option to be developed. So, councillors, we are going to pause for a approximately 15-minute break, which I'm going to say gets us back at 10:55 to continue with the meeting. Those in the digital gallery, please take some time to get a cup of tea and stretch your legs, and we will return at 10:55. Thank you. Thank you, councillors and officers, and welcome back to those in the digital gallery. We continue our meeting now with item 10.4, and I turn to the GM Asset and Environmental Sustainability to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, councillors, executive, staff, and those listening in online. Today, item 10.4 is dealing with the request of naming of 3 lots situated on Forsyth Drive, Tambourine Mountain, which currently houses botanical gardens. Council has undertaken a detailed public consultation for the naming of those lots. It's worth noting within the report, and I take it that you've certainly looked at the details of the report, and I'll shortly hand to Scott Osman, our Manager of Maintenance and Operations, to provide a bit more detail. But I really would like to draw your attention to 3 important points. The responsibility for naming places following, with regard to this responsibility of naming places, the following apply. The current agreement between Council and Tambourine Mountain Botanic Gardens Incorporated is silent on the responsibility for the naming of the lots, which defaults the responsibility to Council. Council has the authority to then officially name the lots, and an organisation then has the ability to name its operations located within the lots. And with that, I'll hand over to Scott to provide a bit more detail.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, councillors, executive, online listeners. Yes, thank you, Chris. Yeah, so they were the 3 key points in regards to the naming request we received from the Tambourine Mountain Botanic Gardens, Inc. In regards to the responsibility for naming those vacant lots. So, as you're aware, the Botanic Gardens have existed up on Tambourine Mountain for approximately 30 years. Those lots that house the Botanic Gardens have never formally been named previously by council. So it's an unnamed parcels of land, and the operation on the top has always colloquially been known as the Tambourine Mountain Botanic Gardens. So we received a request from the association to name the gardens, which we took that request out to community consultation as per our roads and place naming policy. We did receive quantum of responses. I'm just getting the exact number, 469 eligible responses from the community, which an overwhelming response in regards to that was to actually name the lots formerly Tambourine Mountain Botanic Gardens. We did receive a few alternate responses, which would, and there was some very important recognition of Indigenous history in the region as well in some of those alternative responses that we did receive. So realistically, what we're looking to do is we're looking to rename those lots as per the community consultation. The lots will be formally known on Council's asset register as the Tambourine Mountain Botanic Gardens. Okay, but also as per dot point 3, as mentioned by Chris, the organisation has the ability to name its operation that is located on the lots. We're not in a position where we can stop the organisation that manages the gardens on our behalf from calling the infrastructure associated on the top and their operation on the top, the Tambourine Mountain Regional Botanic Gardens in the Scenic Rim. So although we'll formally name the lots Tambourine Mountain Botanic Gardens, the user group that manages the facility has the right to implement their name as requested as well, but it won't be the formal name of the lots.
Thank you. Questions to clarify the report? Councillor Swamborough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question in relation to that policy. If there was an inconsistency between, what a lessee wanted to name the site and council, how would that be resolved? I don't think it's addressed under our policy.
So inconsistency, we can make a recommendation in regards to what the naming of their organisation or their operation is, if it is an offensive or inconsistent use of the, it doesn't align with community purposes as such. So if it is just inconsistent, they wanted to call it, something other Botanic Gardens, we can't really say no to that. It's purely around offensive and those type of names that we've been...
Just as an example, the hang gliding launch site, its formerly place name is Robert Souter Park.
Yep.
But we all know it's leased to the Canungra Hang Gliding Club.
Yep.
If they all of a sudden decided to call it the Canungra launch site,
yep,
how would we deal with that issue?
That would be just another issue that we would have to deal with the same. It would be unofficially known as the Canungra launch site, but the official name of the site is still Robert Souter Park. They are colloquially knowing it as the Canungra launch site. That's what they're just calling their operation. It's not the formal name of the site though. If they called it an offensive name, then we could go back and say to them, hey, that's really an offensive name, but realistically the name is purely what they call their operation. So
the idea of being offensive, is that written into our policy at all, or because clearly wouldn't be offensive, but it'd be misleading and it wouldn't be reflective of its location.
I would need to go back and check on the exact wording in the policy there, Councillor. Sorry, I'm not entirely sure what that is, but
perhaps that's a conversation for another day, councillors. I just alert that this report deals with a specific circumstance rather than just generic discussion. Stick with the content of that would be helpful, and that might be a matter for another day, taken on note to clarify. Any further questions to the report, Councillor McGuinness?
Yes, Scott. Can I just ask? They're very close to names, and will it lead confusion? I know it's not it's a hypothetical, but to me they're that close that it's sort of almost the same, but not quite. You're worried about them? That's probably the question more. Are you worried about the confusion there?
It is a good question, Councillor McInnes, and it's actually not one I've actually thought of myself around the confusion as such. Because we will name the lots as per the community consultation piece, but all other correspondence or any brochures and advertising and so forth will go out under the name of the garden of the association, as they've called it. So I haven't really put too much thought into that. It is a very good question. I don't have a very good answer for you there in that case. On a similar note, and I haven't listed this in the report, is the Gold Coast Botanic Gardens also work in a very similar feature as well. So, but the names aren't similarly aligned. So, the Gold Coast Botanic Gardens are actually located in the formerly named park called Rosser Park. Okay, but they have a operational name of the Gold Coast Regional Botanic Gardens. So very similar naming process to what we're following here in that regards. But to Councillor McInnes's question, yes, the two names of ours are very similar with some slight changes in the middle of it. But it is not unique to our region.
Councillor Swanbury, you have a further question?
Yeah, if just by way of understand the operations of this from here, if we needed to put up a sign, a directional sign on Tambourine Mountain to the Botanical Gardens, would the sign read Tambourine Mountain Botanical Gardens, or would the sign read Tambourine Mountain Regional Botanical Gardens in the Scenic Rim?
Oh, I'm happy to take that question. Look, I think given the length of either name, I think in my view it would more than likely be a sign that says Botanic Gardens with an arrow, given that from a visualisation point of view we try to limit or abbreviate where possible directional signs. So the main name would be the name on the front as you entered, which I would suggest would be the name provided by the organisation. But I think a directional sign that would be informing travellers would just say Botanic Gardens.
Which cause potentially otherwise you cause a traffic accident reading a sign. Further questions, clarification to the report? Councillor Chalk.
Yeah, thank you. Scott, in regards to the public consultation, how do we ensure when we do this process that we don't get motivated parties on either end of the spectrum influence decisions and we get the true public perspective out there?
Yeah, Councillor Chalk, that is the $1 million question, I must admit. And I'm not a comms expert, and I don't profess to be a comms expert by any means. You know, that is the golden question in these types of forums, because you know, we do hear from a particularly motivated group at a time and so forth. So and that is the way community consultation does work. And you know, as has been noted previously, you know, the squeaky wheel syndrome does occur, and people do drum up support in one way or the other to get the outcome that they want. So as not being a comms expert, sorry, I can't, you know, Deborah might have a bit more background in that than me, so she may have some way to answer that question other than that. Sorry.
Thanks, Scott. Councillor Chalk, I guess that's why Council's working on a community engagement, community and stakeholder engagement strategy, including a structured framework. Council also approved in the new initiatives in the this year's budget the development and establishment of a community engagement online portal, and that project's well progressed. So I suppose putting some more structure into it, making sure that the community is aware of these consultations that are occurring, and simplifying and enabling the community to engage with us in a much easier way, I think are tools that will enhance and maybe motivate others who think, you know, some people will go, yeah, that's fair enough. I have nothing more to say. I'm agreeable with it, but they forget to actually get online and tell us that. And so those who generally aren't in agreement or fiercely not in agreement are generally willing to share their opinion. So our framework is to encourage everybody to share their opinion, good, bad or indifferent.
Further points of clarification to the matter before us today? Not ask GM to introduce the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation is that Council approve the naming of the currently unnamed land described as Lot 852 on RP 150147, Lot 49 on RP 155199, and Lot 50 on RP 155199, situated on Forsyth Drive, Tambourine Mountain, as Tambourine Mountain Botanic Gardens. And 2, the Council acknowledge the operational name of the facility as Tambourine Mountain Regional Botanic Gardens in the Scenic Rim, as nominated by the Tambourine Mountain Botanic Gardens, Inc.
CK mover. Councillor Swamborough. Any further questions, councillors? Additional discussion? Not. CK seconder. Councillor McConnell. Councillor Swamborough, you wish to speak?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I understand the two sides of the argument. and it's been resolved through community consultation, which I think is a good thing. I think it's a good compromise, actually. I think the fact that we can accommodate both views in a way. I think I'd make one qualification in speaking towards the motion. I know that the Garden Club, not the Garden Club, the Botanical Gardens Association has requested that, the community respect their right to name that gardens, which is fair enough, and it is close to the name anyway. So I was happy that they did name it what they did with a few additives. But I also would request that the Tamborine Mountain Gardens Committee also respect the views of the other people in the community who've clearly spoken that they do want the place name to be the Tamborine Mountain Botanical Gardens. And I believe that the two names will exist in parallel for quite a long time to come. Probably there will be those that refer to one and those that refer to the other. But having said that, there are, as the report points out, there are precedents here with how place names and operational names are put together. And Robert Souter Park is probably another example, which comes to my mind, and it's a bit closer to home. And so I think, look, I'm happy to support this recommendation.
Anyone wishing to speak against the motion? Seeking leave to speak additionally? Not. We put the motion. Those in favour? The motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Just clarifying a point there with the. We move to item. Thank you for your assistance that matter and diligently following that through. Okay. Item 10.5. We turn to the GM Council Sustainability.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, listeners and in the general public. Item 10.5 today, Mr. Mayor, is the June financial report. First and foremost, I'll take that the report has been read, but would like to reiterate the disclaimer around the timing of the report, given that the timing with the end of year processes for the 2020-21 financial year are still ongoing at the moment. The delay in the processes to accommodate and account for transactions that have occurred, and obviously to allow a more accurate reflection of Council's financial positions as at 30th of June 2021, so that the financial statements can then be audited by external audit by Queensland Audit Office. Also, given the timing of the report, Mr. Mayor will try and moderate the information to only pertain to the report on hand and not to look forward to the forward months or any future considerations around the budgets and stuff. I'll keep the discussions brief, Mr. Mayor. I'll just highlight a couple of points and then certainly open for any questions seeking further clarity. As indicated in the executive summary, page 1 of 10 or page 31 of 54 of the agenda, the net operating surplus sees a 3.403 million ahead of budget. Following the March budget amendment, Council did adopt an operating position of $6.25 million operating deficit. The result as of 30th of June was this operating deficit only accounted to 2.84 million, and a number of factors pertaining to that include various expenditure lines not being expended due to timing and other circumstances, and I can address some of those a little bit later. If I turn to page 37 of the agenda, just the details around council expenditure. For the month of June, there was $6.1 million expended in total. Of that, 2.5 was actually expended with businesses within the Scenic Rim, which equates to about a 40% percentage of the local spend. Averaged out for the full year, this has resulted in a 32% local spend. Compared to this time last year, we were sitting about 28%. So there's a marked a trend of making sure that where possible, we do look local before where we can spend some dollars. The June, the following page around the rates and utility charges outstanding, you can see as of 30th of June 2021, there's a total of 4.01 million. Compared to this time last year, that was around 500,000. No, sorry, for this time previously, as of May, that's seen a reduction of about 523,000 owing. So there's payments are continuing to still come in regards to the outstandings. They were the two main points, Mr. Mayor. I know that there may be a number of questions. I'm happy to sort of open the floor for further clarity.
Thank you, GM. Questions for clarification to the report? Item 10.5. Councillors, Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. Question 2, General Manager, and I refer to page 36, in particular the capital expenditure. I note the first line there of council-wide transactions, and I'm assuming that is the refinanced borrowings at 15 million. My question is...
So just for those who can't see in the room, the GM nodded his affirmation that that assumption was correct.
Thank you, Mayor. Couldn't they see that?
Continue.
Right,
Yeah.
sorry, focus. So my question is relevance to the capital expenditure items on that page 36. Would it be possible to have explanations on the major variations to the revised budget items?
I can start the conversation, and also to preface that we will go into a more detailed discussion with council around this when we start considering the consideration for the 2020-21 carry forward budgets. But I believe General Manager Asset and Environmental Sustainability will be able to provide some brief notes around some of those key items of capital expenditure and the status around their delivery.
So thank you, Oliver. Yes, certainly we'll note that more detailed presentation will be provided to Council. It's also worth noting that we've worked through a number of options of how this can be presented, and during that process we've actually had some missteps with regards to how we can report in a timely manner without becoming foul of some of our obligations with regard to having decisions of councils made, or putting in jeopardy some of our outstanding tender or contract negotiations in some of these instances. So I preface that as well. So that's when timing does get impacted. I will say that of the remainder of which works out to be about $26.5 million when you take the $15 million loan funding off the top, about, or not quite, but almost $20 million of that is actually associated with projects that relate to grant funded projects, whether they be 100% or partially funded grant funded projects. So quite a large number of those projects were actually realised during the financial year. Of the remainder, of the remaining approximately $6.5 million, almost $3 million is tied up with already ordered plant that if anybody's gone to buy a used car or a new car, there's quite considerable delays associated with that. It's not unusual for some of the larger planned items that council does purchase on a normal year to actually be committed and purchased but not yet received in the new financial year. However, to commit to a purchase, you actually need a budget in the first place. So unfortunately, this particular year, that's going to be exacerbated. Of the remainder, probably the highest of note is around $1 million associated with our reseals. Unfortunately, there was a timing issue with once we got the contract awarded. Normally we try to attempt to get the majority of our reseal work done in the September, October months. Unfortunately, that did not occur this year for various reasons. When we did eventually get the contract awarded, the ground temperature was just getting a bit too cold and a little bit too risky. For those of you who know about spraying bitumen, or maybe not, I would like to just say that you need a ground temperature above 20 degrees before you can spray. Otherwise, you can end up with reduction in life of the product. So there are some timings around that. Why we pick September, October is generally you don't have a lot of rain normally, but unfortunately I do hear the long range forecasters talking about a wetter than average spring. So we may still have some issues with pulling that forward, but it's all around trying to get the best quality product on the ground in that particular case. And as mentioned previously, we'll certainly deal with the remainder of the items as future council discussions.
Thank you, GM. Are there further points for clarification, councillors? Sorry, Councillor Enright. Go next. Go again, Councillor Enright, then we'll come to Councillor Swanbury.
Page 39, Oliver. And my question is regarding the contributed assets of roads, bridges and drainage, just perhaps what the origin of those contributed assets may be.
Thank you, Councillor Enright. Just going into the information I have without necessarily breaching any confidentiality items, I can indicate that those contributed assets, which are made up of roads, drainage, parks and other lands, have come from a number of developments, including the Outlook, various stages of the Outlook, Meadowview Road development, Regal Drive extension, Spring Creek and the Botanic Gardens, Tembury Mountain. They've originated varying quantities from those various developments.
Councillor Swanbury, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just following on from the General Manager's discussion about reseals, is it just the weather that's prevented us from finishing this program, the timing or the temperature of the land? I just noticed on page 40 of the report, when it looks at reseals, that last year we carried forward, $350 odd thousand, a little bit more, from the previous year where we didn't finish the program as well. And then we adjusted our budget in the first quarter. We subsequently brought it back in the next quarter to the original figure because we obviously believed we couldn't expend that carryover. And at this point in time, we're $1 million down, but if we go back to that original carry forward figure, we'd be $1.5 million down on our reseals, which would only be 48% of that budget. And I was just wondering, and the question is, the reseals program, is that available for us to see what the program is over the year for the councillors to know, to understand when it's likely that this work will be carried out?
Yes, it certainly is something that can be made available.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Further question?
Yes, I do have further questions, Mr. Mayor. In relation to, I think page 33 of the report, it talks about recoverable works. Just go up to that page. So on page 33, it says that, just trying to look for it.
Screen, if that helps.
It says that a recoverable works have gone budgeted for $4,614,000 and it has gone up to $5.3 million. And I was just wondering if we could get an explanation of where that work is being done. Is it being done outside of the Shire, or is it being done internally, the recoverable works, or what is the breakdown of that particular figure?
That work is works that council do under contract. The reason that's the revenue side. So originally we anticipated about $4.6 million revenue at the start of the year. Obviously, as additional works come in, that's increased that we increased that revenue to 5.3. It's just showing that there's from what we originally from what was re-estimated, the works haven't necessarily been undertaken, the revenue side, and you've just got to be mindful that there is a corresponding expenditure side from this. So this is the revenue side. The revenue side will, without disclosing too much detail, will normally, as the name suggests, recover the expenditure side and see that as a profit. But if that's
so, is any of this recoverable works done by our workforce outside of the Shire?
I'll transfer that through to.
I can confirm a small portion has been, yes.
How small a portion?
I haven't got the figures here today, but it's certainly not half, and it's probably closer to 10%, but I wouldn't be held to that number. It may be plus or minus 10% of that number.
Thank you. Given that our capital works program is 61% under expended, I think the question of reseals not being completed is also an issue, which to me is a little bit disappointing, because those reseals are works which are absolutely necessary to maintain our network of roads. Is it still appropriate that, under the circumstances where we have such a big underspend on our capital works, that we should be sending our gangs outside to do work for other councils?
Just to clarify, that 60% includes that 15 million refinancing as well, so which is yet to be allocated. So
that's not an accurate representation.
No, to normalise it, yeah, it should take that off. And obviously, there's a number of again, we'll discuss further when it comes to the consideration. But a lot of those capital stuff are grant funded as well, so it's not as if. And I'll provide some commentary post the discussions around some of the stats comparing the closure of 30th of June this year as to last year, just some snippets of some of that. But certainly.
Do you have further comment, Chair?
Yes, I do. I will say that to compare reseals to the work was actually carried out by our crews external to the Scenic Rim. We're certainly talking about a contracted amount, that reseals would be based on a seal provider and not necessarily utilise the resources of that were used outside of the region. There are advantages to us having or utilising or engaging with, say, D2MR as one of our biggest supply or people we supply to, and we can then have a further skilled workforce that actually with resources that can be shared across not only our own delivery but also delivery for D2MR. So I think rather than go into the minute detail of decisions made, I'm comfortable to take this question further on notice and provide further update in a more detailed forum.
Just a question, have we ever considered, if we are getting behind in a reseals program, for instance, for whatever reason, of utilising the services of those other councils around us, Gold Coast, Logan and Ipswich, to see if they can come in and do the work to make up the backlog?
I'll probably go back to my response previous around going into further detail at a later date. But in saying that, we certainly look at all options are made to us as far as how we resource or deliver a program. There are varied and many reasons to why a particular project might not be delivered, and certainly happy to provide that as additional information at a later date.
Just a question whilst we see which other councillors have a question. With regard to those grant programs referred to, would it be accurate to say that the timing of the receipt of those grants and the timing for the execution of those grants isn't constrained within one financial year, and whilst they arrive in the prior financial year, the expectation for expending them is over a longer period of time into the subsequent year, and that's why that contributes to that perception of underspend, which is actually not is misguided because of the misalignment of that timing.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. Each of those grants that are awarded to council will come with a agreement, and the agreement indicates a number of milestones, and you know, we're recognising the importance of these grants coming in, so we'll never knock them back. But the timing as to when they arrive, you know, some of these have arrived after the budget deliberations, you know, prior as of 28th of June or something like that, you know, which would cause, from a reporting perspective, you know, cause some anomalies in terms of normalising things. You know, as a comparison between 30 June 2021 and 30 June 2020, you know, we've seen a 32% increase in operating or recurring grants, you know, to the tune of about $1.9 million. We've seen an additional $8.81 million in capital grants as a comparative movement between 1920 and 2021. So, you know, the volumes of grants, which, you know, during our budget deliberations we thought may have been slowly diminishing, have you know, quietly surprised us in terms of their frequency. But certainly, back to your point, that the timing wise of when they're received and when they're expected to be delivered and it's based on the negotiation between council and the grant owner.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Swanborough?
Yes, just on page 34, under current liabilities, you know, the other current liabilities show a figure of original budget 0 to $5.358 million. I wonder if you could just tell me what that was for, please.
Sorry, Councillor, I haven't got the details on me. Can I take that on notice and provide an update of that? And I should be able to provide it today. It doesn't impact the obviously it's a balance sheet item that's recorded anyway. So.
Councillor McConnell, you were getting ready to ask a question.
Yeah, just to the GM People and Strategy in regards to page 33, operating expenditure, employee expenses. She give us some details on how workforce guidelines, not the guidelines, but the expenditure. Is that a $18,000 underspend?
Thank you.
For the year is 36.6 and we budgeted 37.6.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yes, that's an 818,000 underspend, taking into consideration adjustments made for capital projects and also transfer of employee expenses across to materials and services as we supplement our workforce.
$1 million seems to be a fair amount out of a 36. Is that we have less employees than we need?
Councillor, what that accounts for is vacancies of established roles. So it's not unusual. I'm just doing some quick calculations, but it's not unusual to carry a number of, for an organisation to carry a number of vacancies. And in this case, the vacancies that we're carrying are not particularly significant in comparison. You're looking at 2% of your budget in underspend, which is not significant.
Right. Questions, councillors? Councillor McGuinness.
Could I just comment on that answer, please? The GM. For mine, the important figure is the third line there, where we've actually had an overspend in net operating employee expenses, given $1.5 million went into capital, sorry, that didn't go into capital that we'd budgeted for in the last budget review. So we're actually spent more than what, we actually 700,000, that being the difference between the first and second lines, is my reading of that. But I don't disagree with the GM's view on some vacancies, but we do allow that for in our budget too, that we always do have a certain number of vacancies there too. So a comment rather than is my assumption right, or either of the GMs?
And I'll make reference back to the executive summary, Councillor McGinn said it did indicate employee expenses were higher than budget, largely due to the lower allocations to capital due to underspend in there. So it evens out, but the fact that some of the capital works projects where we do have our own workforce working on haven't been done, it just means the operational. That's why it's still showing that. In the overall scheme of things, if everything was done, it should even out.
Any further questions? It's time. I move to introduce the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for item 10.5 is that Council endorse the monthly financial report for June 2021.
Seek a mover. Councillor McGuinness. Any further questions? Councillors, any discussion? Seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell. Councillor McGuinness, you wish to speak?
Right, Mayor, the only other question I would have in moving this is when can we expect the July report?
Yeah. In 5 minutes.
Yeah.
In 2 minutes.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Depending on how long people speak to the motion.
Forgetting about that. Thought I'd seen it somewhere.
It's actually in the agenda, Councillor. Rest assured. Anyone seeking leave to speak against? Seeking leave to speak additionally? Not. We put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Move to item 10.6, which happens to be the monthly financial report for July. GM, could you please introduce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, 10.6 is the council monthly financial report for July. Again, I take it the report has been read, and again, disclaimer around the timing of this, with the accruals happening in July and between July and June, necessitating the finalisation of that to ensure that accurate reflections of the financial position as of 30th of June 2021 is maintained. Given that it's the beginning of the financial year, Mr. Mayor, there is the disclaimer in there around that, at the beginning of each financial year, we begin the budget with timings for the projects built in balancing the needs of the council delivery against weather impacts and further funded projects. The program, both capital and operating, may need to be altered, meaning that we go in, when we provide the budget to be adopted at council, it's at the best interpretation at that particular time, with varying factors that prevailed during the year, including additional grants and everything else. There is a need to potentially alter that, and we have the necessary process to allow the transparency around that amendments. In saying that, the difference to the July 2021 report as to the previous financial year reports, we have now included what's called the period 13 month for capital. And this goes on following discussions with councils around, with council about the delivery expectations of capital works. At times we do, council commits to undertaking the provisions of capital projects. However, outside of factors and constraints of council, some of those projects are actually delivered beyond the 12 months. So it's unfair to assess and score council against delivering those projects when they're physically not able to be delivered within the 12-month reporting period. And that's where there's a disconnect between the financial reporting and the engineering delivery side of things. What we've incorporated now there is what's called the period 13, and that allows for the AES area to assess the capital projects in their planning to determine that the projects that's currently in the budget, the $37 million capital budget, it's been identified that that there's a potential 3 million of that's going to be delivered beyond 30th of June. So that's been held over in what's called the period 13 months, so that to normalise the expected actual deliveries within the 12 month of the reporting period is what we should be assessing on, to reflect that accordingly. Now, even that may require further amendments based on assessment and further planning from Chris and his team in terms of the supply and delivery of products and or impacts associated with weather. And as indicated, of the $37.34 million in capital expenditure for this financial year, at the moment only 3 million has been reflected for delivery beyond the 12 months. And if I turn your attention to page 46 of the agenda, that's where you can see where that's evident. In the capital expenditure, you can actually see period 13. So there's an amount that sort of shows that's as long as the delivery expectations are aligned with the current months and not inclusive of the period 13, then that's where that's the accountability and tracking of the delivery of the projects. Given it's the first month of the financial year, it's fairly straightforward in terms of nothing really of high interest to note. lower levels of local spend, given the some of the bulk supplies that have been necessitated outside the region. You can see there it's currently on page 51 to 54. It's currently sitting at 21%, or equating to 1.6 out of the total 7.7 million spend. But as we progress during the financial year, where other materials and services are procured, council's strategy around local spend should see that edge up to the normal, or what we anticipated as being our the bar that we've set. Page 52, as of 31 of July, you'll see the outstanding rates and debtors is now reflective of the 2021-2022 first half rates levy. This levy amounted to about $31.3 million. Of that current levy, as of end of July, only 24.698 million remains outstanding. Which is in line with normal years, given the trends. We continue to monitor associated impacts with COVID and the associated lockdowns. Happy to field additional queries where they arise, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Page 48. And perhaps before I go to page 48, just a comment that it's great to see that we've hit our targeted growth of rateable properties now to 1.7%, hit and exceeded the 1.5, which is excellent to see. Page 48, and this might be similar to Councillor Swanborough's previous question in the June quarter, is that other current liabilities figure of 6.819 million.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've just had a confirmation. That's the treatment under WASB 15 and 1058, which accounts for grant fundings received in advance. So we have to hold them there as their liability. We've received the funds, however, they're not. They're restricted and they're a liability because we still have to spend them. And that's as of July. There's a further increase amount of that from, it was 5.18 in June, is now 6.819, and that will also includes the levied state fire levies. Given that we ran the first half rates levy in July, there's an amount of that relates to what council levied on behalf of the Queensland government with the emergency service levy. So that's also sitting in there that needs to be remitted to the state government.
Page 50, and this refers to the capital expenditure again, particularly with reference to the commitments column, and how are these calculated, and why is this figure different to the variances report from June?
First question first. Commitments are basically where council has an order in place for those particular projects. You can, if I referred you back to page 46 of the report, that indicates the capital expenditure. You'd recall that for each month we indicate what the commitments are, just to show that the continuation of those projects. So for these particular $37 million of capital works, planning is already underway, and there's $14 million worth of orders that have already been raised to get those projects started. So the purchase order is there to engage the necessary supplier or contractor to provide the services, but they haven't delivered and haven't invoiced us yet. So they're sitting as committed. Once the invoice is received and it's paid, it'll then be actuals, and then that committed should go down. But obviously, as the other works go up, that will also increase when the other staging and planning for the other projects also commence.
So just digging into that a bit further, then that's talking about projects that have had orders placed against it for various items, as opposed to the previous capital expenditure items that were potentially carry forwards.
There's no carry forwards yet in this budget. This is purely 2021, 2022.
Probably variances.
That's right. So the variance what we report on is always on the actuals, but the commitment is to show that there is a commitment there to get the projects undertaken, given timing, everything else. That just hasn't converted back to actual. So, but yeah, it's purely 2021, 2022 capital works program of the $37.4 million.
Further questions, councillors? Not, we'll move to the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for item 10.6 is that council endorse the monthly financial report for July 2021.
Seek a mover. Mr. Enright. Further questions? Discussion? Seconder, Councillor Chalk. Speak further, Councillor Enright. Anyone seeking leave to speak against? Seeking leave to speak additionally? Put the motion, those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We have two items before us for confidential consideration today. Item 11.1, reappointment of the Chief Executive item closed under section 254J 3A, and 11.2, the Lake Mulgra Facilities Upgrade Project Update is closed under section 254J 3C and G.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just make a quick comment. That I disagree with how 11.1 has been brought before council. Thank you.
Sorry, councillor. Would
you like me to expand?
Well, councillor, it's being brought as a closed item. Are you arguing that it shouldn't be a closed item?
No, I'm not arguing that it shouldn't be a closed item.
Then, councillor, your comments out of order, I believe. But
could we get
let your comment
could we
stand?
Ask governance to just see if I can make a comment before it goes into closed? Or he's not here. Would that be okay?
Well, the only thing we're discussing is whether it's a confidential item or not, councillor. Whether we're going into a closed meeting. That is the topic we're talking about at the moment. So, are you arguing that it shouldn't be a closed item?
No,
that's all I'm saying is that's the matter we're trying to decide at the moment. Is that correct, governance?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Mayor. Under 254J3A, appointment and discipline or dismissal of Chief Executive Officer is what pertains to 11.1.
Seek a motion to go into closed session in accordance with the requirements of the meeting and other forums procedure to deal with the two matters as per the requirements, the legislative requirements that apply to them. Seek a mover. Councillor West. Seconder. Councillor Enright. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. For those in the gallery, I cannot estimate a return time frame for this discussion today, but we will be stopping for lunch in the middle of this whilst we're in close. So I would estimate at earliest we may be 1:30. My endeavour will be that if we are to return, we will return on the half-hour mark any time from there. So that's the best I can endeavour. Thank you. We'll be back when we're able to. Welcome back, councillors and executive, and those who have been patiently waiting in the digital gallery. As I said, I'd try to recommence on the half hour or hour. Here we are with two matters to deal with via resolution with regard to, and I ask for a mover to return into open. Right, seconded. Councillor West, those in favour? We've returned into open, and we can now I have a motion to put on the table regarding item 11.1, and that is that under section 20.1 of the Scenic Regional Council Standing Orders Procedure CM 03.01 PR.01, item 11.1 be deferred to a future meeting, and two, that council delegate power to the mayor to negotiate with the chief executive officer an extended timeline for council's notification of its intent or otherwise to reappoint him to the role of chief executive officer. I'm moving that. I seek a seconder. Councillor Enright. I don't intend to speak to it. Councillors, I think we've had enough dialogue. Does anyone seek leave to speak additionally? Not. Put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 11.2. GM, I'll ask you to introduce the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation for item 11.2 is that council endorse the allocation of $714,000 in recognition of additional costs to meet current scope of the Lake Mulgra Facilities Upgrade Project, funded from Council's Facilities Capital Works 2021-2022 budget allocation, which is to be reflected as part of Council's September 2021 budget review. And two, in accordance with clause 20.6.3 of the Scenic Regional Council Standing Orders Procedure CM 03.01 PR.01, council maintain confidentiality over the contents of the report due to ongoing negotiations of a commercial nature relating to the Lake Mulgra Facilities Upgrade Project.
Recommendation in two parts, councillor. I seek a mover. Councillor McConnell. Are there any questions? Not. I seek a seconder. Councillor Chalk, wishing to speak. Councillor, anyone seeking leave to speak? Put the motion. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, officers. Thank you to those patiently joining us in the digital gallery. That brings us to the close of the ordinary meeting today. Good afternoon.